Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Muse Memorandum. I'm your host, JJ, and today we are on episode 1 of season 2 of the Conversation series. I have a really special guest with me today, Robert Phoenix. And for those of you who may not be familiar with Robert and his work, he is a very well known and respected astrologer, as well as a synchro mystic. Um, Psychic, speaker, researcher, writer, journalist, and probably a whole slew of other things that I'm not aware of. But today we're going to get into all things creative with Robert, and specifically with his writing and journalism and perhaps a few other things. So I'm really excited, and without further ado, I'd like to welcome you to the show, my friend, my Virgo brother, Robert Phoenix. How are you doing today?
JJ, I'm doing actually really well. I've used this momentum for the new year in a lot of these Capricorn aspects to you know get some forward momentum going, and it feels really good to do that in spite of any uh, horror story narratives that are floating around the the surround sound holographic matrix theater. So that's been my jam at the beginning of the year, and it's been good. Moved into a new house.
That's right.
Uh, yeah, my mother, who'd been living in California since 1964, when we moved from New Jersey as a very small family, just the three of us, to California, uh, got sick last year.
Mm.
She got sick at the beginning of 2023. It was just kind of an ongoing thing throughout the year. And by the time late June rolled around, I was finally able to extract her from California and bring her to Texas. And since then, we sold her condo and she bought a house here in Kerrville. So it's been a really active year on the home front, moving her, integrating her into my life, which isn't always easy. Integrating me into her life, which I know isn't always easy for her, and then going through another move. So she's essentially moved twice in 1 year,
Wow.
and she's in her 80s, but she's tough as leather. This woman. So, and it's been really interesting because growing up, I didn't have much of a relationship with her. I had more of a relationship with my father, which at times was volcanic, and at other times was very symbiotic. But my mother was always this kind of almost like a background character in my own life.
Wow.
She was very essential to our family because she always out earned my father. Um, so she was, an integral part of our family. And she also held up, all of her domestic duties as well. So none of that can be discounted in terms of her contribution to my life. But as somebody who knew me, um, that was not really part of our our relationship. So a lot of this has been kind of force feeding her who I am without force feeding her. Like she's just been immersed in my environment, right? So I do an event every year here in Texas, uh, where a lot of people from my live stream show up and I have guest speakers and artists and things like that. So she attended this year, and so she got to see what kind of what my world is about. And I think it was a really interesting kind of moment in time for that sort of peeling back a bit of a layer from the like the scrim of our relationship,
Mhm.
because she didn't really know what to do with me. I mean, she's not really wired all that emotionally, which I think has helped with her survival ability. But you know, she also didn't know what to do with me. And I'm pretty sure, and this is without any kind of judgment, that she probably would have been happier with some other kind of son. I'm being honest.
Mm.
She would have been happier with, at least at a certain level, with somebody who could tell a cohesive and linear story. She would always talk about her friends and how her friends, kids did this or did that or did this or did that. And after my father died, it was just the two of us. So I really had to, we really had to kind of focus in a lot of ways depend on each other during that period of time, because I was going through a transition. I was getting a divorce, and I was trying to get my feet on the ground as a working astrologer, which at that time for me was somewhat, it wasn't difficult, but it was like I was putting myself through a planned apprenticeship by not charging people a ton of money.
Mm.
Uh, I didn't feel particularly right about charging people $300 for a session. And it's not that I couldn't have done it and gotten away with it. I could have, because I'm pretty good at what I do. But looking back on it, I was, I was undercharging people. But in a lot of ways, it was kind of a self-imposed apprenticeship on my end. So, but I wasn't really doing well financially, because I was also just, out of a marriage, and there were a lot of other, things that you wind up saving when you're with
Mm-hmm.
another person. So I encountered some financial bumps in the road at the time, and she would help me out with that, and I helped her out with all the logistics of, literally moving heaven and earth for her life and getting her resettled, and all the things that I'm pretty good at. But it was still this very uncomfortable space of, almost like, two strangers in some ways being
Yeah.
thrust in the same space for whatever that space is. And I remember there was one point where we were like outside of this Mexican restaurant in Berkeley, and we were having tacos or whatever. And I asked her, I said, "Are you ashamed of me?" And she kind of said yes.
Wow.
And the reason why was that she couldn't explain to her friends what I did, because all of her friends' kids had, L7 jobs. And oh, he does this or she does this, and they do this, and they live here, and their kids go there, right? And
It all
you know,
fits in the box, right?
it
Yeah.
all fits the box. And and I'm the wacky astrologer guy who just got a divorce, right? And like, you know, I don't think she was really comfortable with that. So, and I kind of had to deal with that, and this idea that, part of me thinks, well, fuck, I got cheated on that end of the deal, right? Like, because I've talked to people who, we'll just use men. Well, I've talked. Oh my God, my mother loved me, and she would always hug me, and you know, tell me she believed in me, and da 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 da. Da. I'm like, shit, I never got any of that,
Mm.
right? I mean, I got other things, which are, I don't want to discount those things, but I didn't get that stuff. So, I grew up with, kind of a deficit in that world. And now here we are, and, we're living under the same roof. Um, and I would have to say that our relationship is vastly improved. And, since she's been here, she's died almost twice.
Wow.
So, and then watching firsthand a person slowly becoming aware of their mortality, is a very interesting process. And the things that occur, like going to bed is difficult,
Yeah.
because I think in the back of her mind, she thinks that she may not wake up, right? And the other night, I've been noticing that she's been sleeping with her light on, and you can't really get a good night's sleep with your light on.
Yeah.
So I said, "Why is your light on?" She said, "Well, I have to get up in the middle of the night." I'm like, "Well, do you really need your light on? Don't you have a flashlight here or something? Oh yeah, it's in my drawer. I don't
Mm.
really think that that's why she wanted to keep that light on. I mean, I think it's a metaphor. She wanted to keep the light on.
Yeah. Yeah, I can totally see that.
Yeah. So it's an interesting process to be a part of, and a lot of my uh, kind of resentment and kind of pushback against her is, is melting away, which I think is good for both of us.
That's really good. I'm experiencing the same with my parents, and I just visited with them in Arizona just the last couple of weeks, and it's a similar. Obviously, we're not living together, but just to go through that process of all of the ailments and conditions that arise over the years, and how it gets more difficult for them to handle things, and just sort of witnessing the aging process. Um, it's definitely, it's very, it can be very challenging and frustrating, and um, there's a whole slew of emotions that we go through.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I
I
can
mean,
imagine.
even I'm older than you are. I think probably I'd say considerably, but I'm older than you are.
I'm 50, so.
Yeah. So we're talking 13 years, right? Um, and it's just amazing observing the difference between, because it wasn't that long ago. Like there was 60-year-old me and then 63-year-old me, and man, there's a difference. There is a difference. The 50s, I never really experienced a huge difference. Like in my 50s, I was probably nearly as fit as I was in my 30s. Could I do the same things and have the same kind of mobility in basketball and stuff like that? Probably not. But I coached my son's baseball teams in my 50s, and I was very physical. And, throwing batting practice and hitting infield and outfield and all that stuff. And I was I could have done that the same in my 20s or 30s. But the 60s, you're kind of hitting, like the first ring of Saturn in your 60s.
Mm.
And I remember my father, before he died, he said, 50s, they're great. Don't sleep on your 50s. 60s, mm, mm, not so bad. Okay. 70s, he was like, he was not prepared for this. And, he was a very physical guy. And, getting the, ringside account from his world was like, oh, okay, should file that away.
Wow.
Yeah.
So do you feel like for things that have things and people that have influenced you and inspired you in your life, do you feel like your mother or father contributed to kind of anything? I mean, I know you're primarily an astrologer now, but any of the creative aspects of what's gotten you to your place where you are now have influenced you at all or given you
My
inspiration?
father, my father always encouraged me to write because he thought I was a good writer. And I haven't written that much in a long time. Um, when I first started off with astrology, I I wrote because that's what the medium was. People had blogs,
Yeah.
and there weren't apps and YouTube, and I started podcasting in 2010. So I was a real early adopter with podcasting, but I wrote a lot and I loved it. It was to me, you can say things in a different way that you certainly can't speaking. So he encouraged me to write, um, which was good. And he never said, you know, why don't you put down those funny? Because I used to write a lot as a kid and I, you know, I would write my own comics, or I would write, poetry, or I'd write lyrics to songs in my head that nobody would ever play. And sometimes I'd write comedy routines in my head. I would do all that stuff. And sometimes he would hear that, and he liked it. So he encouraged me. The other side of my father was that he had a very curious intellect, and he was a Leo, so he was a great hobbyist. His work life was highly unremarkable, but as a hobbyist, he's right up there with some of the world's best. Trust me. I showed you his
Yeah.
so he was like a lost wax casting method guy, and I would go out in the garage and kind of a little sorcerer's apprentice and watch him do all this stuff, because I was really fascinated by the vulcanization process. Where you take this this torch and just melt this metal down, and it turned like liquidy and everything. As a kid, like that's really cool, right?
Yeah.
Then he'd pull up the gate on the centrifugal caster, spin around, and
Wow.
And then I'd always look forward to like the splashdown moment where he would take the canister that the whatever the medium was, I don't know, diatomaceous plaster, I forget what it was, but that's what was inside. The ring was inside there in
Hmm.
its raw form, and we would use the bathroom in our house. We'd fill the sink. He'd make sure fill the sink. I'd go and fill the sink, and he'd stick that thing in there, and rip all the steam and everything. And when it was warm enough, I'd be the guy that go in and dig it out. It's like buried treasure. And there's this this rough copy of a ring. And I don't think I had the patience to to do all the fine carving and everything.
Hmm.
But I really enjoyed watching that process. I thought it was fucking magical. Um, so he was a great hobbyist, and one of his hobbies was he would get obsessed with certain things. And there was a period when they had like Leonard Nimoy's In Search Of, and I think Rod Serling, if I'm not mistaken,
Yeah.
did a thing on Eric von Daniken, who is still alive, which blows my mind. Because Eric von Daniken in the 1970s looked like he was about 60, you know? And he's still around. And he wrote the book In Search of Ancient Astronauts. So, that was one of those seminal kinds of works where people were looking over the fence and trying to understand, what is this doing here? How did they make those lines down there? There's like no reference point for this stuff, right? And the crazy paintings in the Orthodox churches where you got freaking UFOs up in the top corner, like
Yeah.
fighting each other. It's like how does that shit happen, right? So he went down that rabbit hole, and then I went down that rabbit hole with him because I always loved that stuff. I was always into paranormal. I love the paranormal. I love the psychic world. And it was just I was fascinated by all that stuff. And so I went down that path with him, and so I got into it. I think it was around the 8th grade, and I had this really crazy teacher in my 8th grade social studies class, Mr. Sanchez, and he was a fucking commie from San Jose State, right? He was La Raza, and he was always busting the chops on the man and the system, and he and I would go at it. We would have these debates about he would call me Morris, and he knew that I was always going to take the position opposite of his position, but he liked me, and I started to talk about this ancient astronaut stuff. And he said, man, why don't you do a lecture on this in our class? I'm like, all right, sure. So I got up and I kind of unfolded the whole thing, with
Wow.
class. And the guy who taught that class after, Dave Latham, he was sitting in the classroom. He came up and he said, hey, would you mind coming to my class and talking about that? I'm like, yeah, sure. I got out of class for whatever I was doing, and I got to do the international talking. So, those were areas that my father and I connected with. And, he was psychologically one of the most astute people I've ever run across. And he was brutally psychological at times. Like he would know where your weak spots were, and he would, if he needed to, he'd go right in there, and ferret them out. He was kind of brilliant and kind of sadistic in that way.
Mm.
And I had a very intense relationship with him because when uh, I think going all the way through high school, but starting when I was young, both my parents had very difficult pasts, and my father had a really troubled past, and he had a lot of anger, just a ton of anger, and it had to come out somewhere at some point. And behind those four walls, it got real heavy at times, and so that was it was a kind of a big initiation for me in terms of the human experience, because I dealt with a very uh, big person who would come unhinged, and I would see it. Right, I'd see him leave his body,
Mm.
and then he would come back, and there would be all this remorse and everything. And and after a while, it was like, take your remorse and stick it up your fucking ass.
Yeah.
You gotta stop this. And it's weird how, in some ways, prophecies become self-fulfilling. And I was always kind of getting into things, and I didn't, I never liked following the rules. And so there were probably times where, looking back, I may have deserved, maybe not to the extent at which it went down, but there are times where I may have deserved, a little bit of very tough love, because I could be a real dick when I was a kid, and I can understand that. And being a father now and having to go through some of the stuff that I went through with my son, although albeit not as much, I completely get it. But and this is part of what makes us who we are.
Yeah.
And I was a Scorpio. I'm a Scorpio rising, and a lot of Scorpio rising people have stuff in their background that's very intense. But I felt like in a lot, I actually wrote a piece on this, and it was for an anthology on Pluto, and it was on North Atlantic Books. I used to be friends with Richard Grossinger, who was the publisher of that company, and he asked me to write a piece on anything around Pluto. So I wrote a piece called "My Father Pluto," and it was really about being initiated by Pluto. And it's like, well, as a client, bring it to the table, because I've been in places, right? I've had to deal with the intensity of feeling like I may not leave this living room alive, right? And
Yeah.
then coming back from that. And then the other part of that too is that, being a Scorpio rising person, um, what happens with Scorpio rising people, we all have a degree of this, some way or another, is I began to develop hyper attenuation, which was, okay, I got to read this situation real fast.
Yeah.
When that door opens, who's walking through that door, right? Is it Dr. Jekyll or Mr. Hyde?
Which character? Yeah.
Yeah. So the hyper attenuation skills, in a lot of ways, were training, because I began to do that in other areas of my life. And I started to read people and try to understand where they were coming from very quickly. Because once you have to establish the threat at a baseline level, it's applied, kind of a cross-platform application. And I do think that's helped me a lot in my work, because it sharpened my ability to quickly determine who was who and what. Like, I could go into a room and just start telling stories pretty quickly. Um, so yeah, there's the influence, and the writing part. He provided the impetus to that, and I saw him as sort of the dark initiator. And he wasn't all bad. I mean, there were other parts of him that were like kind of like the ideal father, which is kind of weird, right? Because it's like, you get mixed up a little bit
Yeah.
with how this is supposed to look and work. So, but and again, I took the good with not so good, and kind of shaped me in a lot of ways into who I am. And I would say he probably um, gave me the sort of the encouragement to write, and his insatiable kind of curiosity to dig into all these different things. I think I got that from him. My mother is just a grinder. She's a grinder. And she would get up early in the morning, make people breakfast, and then get into a hellish commute, work all day, come home into a hellish commute, and then make dinner.
Mm,
Right?
yeah.
Like, that's just a grinder. And I like to think that some of that has contributed to my work ethic with what I do, because I think I'm a little bit of a grinder. I work a lot. So I would say I got the grinder from her. Yeah, and then there's other parts of me that have nothing to do with them, and I don't know where they come from.
I understand that. And what sign is she?
This is really trippy. She's a Pisces, but I know her chart. She's born on the 15th of March. As far as Pisces goes, that's it. She's got Mercury, Saturn, and Venus in Eris. My mother has a lot of discord in her life. So she's got a ton of Aries. And she, again, look at astrology. Who did my mother work for the majority of her life? She worked for the U.S. Navy.
Oh, wow.
So you get the Pisces part, and then you get the Aries, like armed services part, right?
Goodness.
It's my guy, Jasper.
Yeah. Hey, Jasper. We get a special appearance.
My mother was a what they call a contract specialist, and she wound up kind of arriving at the same position that men with engineering degrees have, and she just graduated from high school with a general education degree. So, I admire her ability to, just raise her situation up and be the grinder. What's interesting is, do you know about human design?
Yeah, I do.
So my mother, myself, and my son were all projectors.
Wow.
So there must be a projector thing that runs in the family.
I'm a, what do you call it? Manifestor generator.
Yeah, I mean, I envy the generators, because all you guys have to do is just respond and put your energy into something. And as a manifesting generator, you got the extra kind of turbo boost, right? I envy that stuff.
Well, I think we all have our strong points and weak points, So, when did you really get into your journalism more as a career?
Well, so when I was in high school, while other people were, taking shop and stuff like that, I took journalism, and I was on the high school newspaper, and I was surrounded by a lot of really smart people and very good writers. I don't think I was a very good writer at the time. I had a lot of things I wanted to say. I had voices in my head. I spent most of my life watching lots of TV. I was probably better as an orator or somebody who would talk than a writer. But I also read the newspaper a lot, and I liked reading. So it was the best kind of outlet for me in high school. And eventually I became a sports editor by the time I was a senior. And so that was a good experience. And then when I went to junior college, it was like, we just moved from San Jose to a town called San Mateo in California. And they have a junior college there. And my parents were funny. It was like, well, you're going to go to San Mateo Junior College, and they have a broadcast program there. Why don't you do that? And I could have said, no, I want to do something else. I'm like, yeah, that sounds good to me. I'll do that. So I went to San Mateo City College and got into the broadcast communication program. And I did really, really well. I mean, I was like 18, 19 years old. And I was really good at producing shows, um, coming up with the ideas and content and connecting with the guests, and, getting them, scheduling them, working with the crew and selling them on the concept. Um, and I was really good at it. And I had this teacher, his name was Dick Rasmussen, who a lot of these teachers were also worked in the industry. And um, Jasper, calm down.
Is he doing that?
Yeah, he's doing that. So he, at one point in time, there was this one guy it was one of these guys who worked for ABC Sports. He was like one of the guys who produced Monday Night Football. Um, his name's I want to say Chet Forte, but it's not Chet Forte. Don Ohlmeyer, and he looked at me with, and this is not a guy that gave people a lot of praise. He was a very, very tough guy in terms of what he expected from you as a student. He said, you could be Don Ohlmeyer one day if you wanted to be. And it was like, wow, that's interesting. But then I had this crisis when I was, it was my last kind of semester there. And I'd become the lead producer for this weekly, it was back when these magazine shows started to happen. So they weren't straight news, but there was a little news in them, mostly kind of features. And so we had our own weekly magazine show called Peninsula Weekly. I came up with the name, by the way. And so we would have these segments that we would shoot. Some would be in studio, some would be outside the studio. And I'd risen to this position where I had some credibility and power. You have to remember, I'm only like 19 years old. So yeah. I came up with this, we needed to do the last show of the season. So at that time, I'd been volunteering at this school for like severely disabled kids. And they had these old school black and white video cameras. And I wanted to get experience on the Zooms and doing things smoothly. And so they were looking for volunteers to run those cameras and run the tape. So I did that. And I also, it's like maybe help these kids, whatever. And these kids were really disabled, like, drooling and, could barely get a spoon to their mouth. Like if they could take a bite of food, it was, considered like climbing Mount Everest for these kids. Wow. So I thought, well, why don't we do a benefit for that school? And I'm sure the school didn't need the money, right? They probably had their grants and everything, but why don't we do a benefit for the school? And then what would that look like? Well, at that time, they would have these golf tournaments. And so, well, why don't we do a miniature golf tournament? And we'll turn into a benefit for the school. So I went to the executive producer, who was the teacher. She said, yeah, sure, that sounds great. So then she brought this other guy in, Howie. Fucking asshole. Just, I mean, come on, the name, Howie. I'm glad Howdy changed his name from Howie to Howie.
Yeah, it's much better.
So I remember one day, Howie's now working with me. And, Howie I think he was an East Coast guy. He was kind of around my age. And he's like, I need this from you. I need this from you. I need this from you. And after he's all said and done, I said, Howie, can we use the word we? Let's use we. It's better than you. I'll use we with you too. Right? Like at 19, I was still I was pretty savvy still, at that age. He didn't like that.
Oh, good.
That shit didn't like that. So then there was a part of me that at times would like to coast because I was good at doing things very quickly and on the fly. So I would get into these coasting cycles. But just to give you an idea, we had to have a raffle to raise money, right? So I went around to all these businesses and I got them to donate all these prizes.
Wow.
And so that was all me. And I would go in and introduce, and I'm a 19-year-old kid. And I was baby face. If you saw what I looked like at 19, I looked like I was 16. So I got all and even got the promotional materials like done really cheaply because I told the printer and stuff what we were doing. Then I lined up all the guests, all these local celebrities. We had this guy, his name was Sylvester. I forget his last name, but that wasn't Sylvester. Nick, I forget his last name, but we had a AM radio station called KSOL. It was the soul station. And he was the most famous DJ there. He agreed to come. I think I got John Ayers from the 49ers to come. We had a local politician. So we got all these people to show up, right, at this event. I went to it was one of those Malibu Grand Prix. Meaning I got them to buy into the idea, right? So it's all happening. It's all happening. But there were a few details that I was kind of sleeping on a little bit because there's a part of me that likes that, every now and then likes to coast. Mm-hmm. And I got caught in a downdraft with some of the coasting details. And we had a walkthrough, and I could feel the tension growing between me and the executive producer. And we had a on-site walkthrough at the mini golf course. And something happened. And she started yelling at me in front of everybody, which I didn't like. But instead of, yelling back, I walked over to her and I put my hand gently on her shoulder to try to calm her down and say, "Hey, Linda," and talk her. And then she went even more ballistic and yelled, "Get your hands off me."
Oh, man.
Right. And it's like, fuck, this is not going in the place that I wanted to go to. So eventually I wound up like being put up for review by the Dean of Fine Arts. And this is a guy whose son I used to run around with a long time ago when I lived in kind of close to that part of the world. So he kind of knew me as a little kid, kind of. And I was kind of a terror as a little kid. I got into a lot of trouble. So he probably believed the story more than he would, like my side of it. But there was Linda's side, there was my side, and then there was Howie's side.
Oh, no.
And of course, Howie's like, taking Linda's side. I'm like, they're fucking lying. And I suppose if I wanted to, I could have gotten other people and brought them in and made a big deal out of it. I could have gone above, the director of fine arts or whatever. But I didn't do it. I was so gutted. And I wound up leaving not only the junior college, at some point I graduated, but I left television and I left the broadcast medium and I studied English literature in college. And for me, when I was young, whenever we were asked to write an essay, I would never write an essay. I would always write a story. And the teachers loved that. They loved this. They're like, fuck.
Because essays can be really boring. Yeah, exactly.
Right. And so I would, because honestly, I didn't understand essays. I didn't understand that part of my brain. I mean, I could argue things if I needed to, but I didn't understand the formality, of the thesis and, body.
Yeah, I've never understood that either.
And I never got that. So it was always much more fun to write a story. So I get to college, San Francisco State. I'm like, okay, I'm going to study English literature. And the only reason I wound up studying it is because I met this really wacky woman who is a fucking genius. And I'm like, man, I want whatever she's got, because she's living in a different world. And of course, later after the fact, I remember she's an Aquarius, and she was very Aquarian and very out there. And we got to become very good friends. And I even, met her family and her brother. And she was originally from Southern California, and just one of the most brilliant. I mean, she could like take an argument and just go into the freaking stratosphere with it, connect all these dots, and her language was impeccable. Like you meet people every now and then like that. They're just,
Yeah.
they're prodigies, or they're just gifted in a way that other people just aren't. And they don't even have to work at it. It's just, she was also very, how would I describe this? Like she was kind of borderline in some ways.
Mm.
Looking back, she had these kind of borderline moments looking back on it, where reality just got too much for her. But it's like, oh, well, you study English? Well, shit, that must be a cool thing, because you're pretty cool. I'll try it out. So I started to study English and literature in college. And I was always, I read some, but the things that I would read were not, like I would read They Call Me Assassin by Jack Tatum, who played for the Raiders, right? I would read stuff like that. The Basketball Diaries, Jim Carroll,
Okay.
those were the things I read. I didn't read Jane Austen. I didn't even read F. Scott Fitzgerald, for that matter. And in high school, paucity of the literary canon, get some Romeo and Juliet and Tom Sawyer and shit like that. But so now I'm thrust into with all these people who were fucking English wonks, right? And I had to compete against those people, not literally, but in some ways I did. And I always describe myself as the most illiterate person you would ever meet. I mean, I could write, but I was raised on television.
Yeah.
And I could talk. And I was really good at talking. Teachers loved me in their class because nobody wanted to talk.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I'll talk. So, but now I was in a different world, and I just remember feeling like, I need to train up real fast here. And there were two events at that time. Is this okay with where we're going? Is this all right?
Oh yeah, I love it. Please go ahead.
So there were two events in my life that were pivotal at that time. One was being humiliated by a professor.
Mm.
One of the most important things that ever happened to me. His name was Marvin Nathan, and it was a class called Humanism and Mysticism.
Wow.
And we were studying the Tao Te Ching and the Analects of Confucius. So I'm reading it. I'm like, man, I got this shit. I totally get it. I've got all these buzzwords in my head. And, during a class, here's Mr. Talkie, right? I'm gonna talk. And I started to talk about it. And he said, really? Show me where it says that. And then I tried to talk my way out of it. And I just kept digging a deeper and deeper and deeper grave. Right. So by the time, my moment of infamy was up, I was shrinking in my chair.
Mm.
Right. Because it was like I was embarrassed by how little I actually knew. And I remember it was very strategic on my part. At the beginning, I was sitting more near the front of the class. After that, I was in the fucking back of the class.
Oh no.
I literally moved myself into the back of the class, because not because I didn't want to call on me, but I think intuitively, I think that's where I knew where I belonged.
Mm.
Was the back of the class. I had a lot to learn. So that was a very pivotal event. And, I didn't take it personally. I didn't quit the class, right? It was like, I gotta shut the fuck up and figure out what's really going on here instead of putting my ideas into what's going on.
Yeah.
And then I had this other event, and the story around this one's a little bit longer, but it ties into what I'm talking about. So during that period of time, I was a hedonist, right? I've always had to kind of deal with the unspoken credo, do as thou will, even though I never read any Crowley in my life, at least that point in time. But if I want to do it, generally I fucking did it, right? If I was in a relationship and, I wanted to, cheat on my girlfriend, if the moment arose and the woman was hot enough, I'd fucking do it, right? Or, if I wanted to, take acid or, drink my ass off, I think I stopped smoking weed. I stopped doing that. Everything else is okay. But I would do it, right? So, but then there was this other part of me that was, I'm like, I started to get weirdly into this truth thing. It was like this thing was like burrowing itself in my brain. And I'd seen My Dinner with Andre, and it like changed my life. And I'm just like, fuck, there's more going on here. I got to get to this more going on thing. I don't know how I'm going to get there, but and I started talking to my girlfriend about it at the time. And I started having these discussions with her about truth. And she started thinking I was a little crazy, right? So one night I was hanging out with my buddies, and we were drinking, I'll never forget, drinking White Horse Scotch. And I got really shit-faced. And I would do this every now and then. I would do the booty call at midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning, right? But with her. So I'm like, okay, here we go, right? And it was around 3 a.m, which is a little late for the booty call. But, all my friends were in bed now and I needed something else to do.
Yeah.
So I got my car, and this was on the peninsula, and she was living in San Francisco. And it was very close to where Candlestick Park used to be. And I started to fall asleep at the wheel of my car. I was drunk and tired, and I started to drift. And the next thing I know, I'm up against the center divide. And it was just such a slow drift, and my side view mirror got clipped. Part of my door kind of got clipped, and I woke up. I was like, oh shit. That'll wake you up. So I made it to her house, knocked on her door. Her sister opened the door. The reason why her sister was there was because it was her 21st birthday that year. And it was a big weekend birthday party for her. So her sister was there. She lived with her brother. They shared a house out in the Lake Merced region area of San Francisco, out in the avenues. So the sister, who had been sleeping in her bed, begrudgingly got out of the bed, got on the couch, and I went in there and fell asleep. Woke up the next morning, and it was a little bit of a cold shoulder towards me that morning. And I could feel a little bit of the draft in the household, but kind of brushed it off. So I went about my day, and I'm like, I'm going to go buy some new records. I want to make some mixtapes. We're going to plan at the party night. So that's what I did. I bought some records. I got like the cool, like multilingual version of Heroes by Bowie. I recorded the German version. I made really good mixtapes. So I made these mixtapes. We go to the party, and I brought my buddy up from the peninsula, and there was this guy at the party selling acid. And he came up to me and said, hey, Robert, you want to buy some acid? I'm like, fuck yeah. So I talked to my friend. I said, hey, Greg, you want to do some acid? He says, yeah, sure, let's do this. All right. So we buy this acid. And I'm having a very good time, right? And my mixtape is playing. My my girlfriend, who by that time had become, she was interesting because when I met her, she was like this Dan Fogelberg, um, kind of Jackson Brown girl, right? You know, avocado mafia. Um, but by the time by this time, I kind of turned her out into punk rock and new wave. And, you know, she had a little short new wavy haircut and new wave skirt and everything. So she had really changed. She was cool. But so she would disappear into these rooms every now and then. I'm like, oh, I know what she's doing. You know, she's doing coke, right? But I thought it was interesting that I wasn't there because normally I'd be there, and I was kind of taking note of this, right?
Mm.
And you take note of these things when you're that high. You know, the notes start to get real loud in your brain. And then we were dancing at one point, and she said, "You know, I almost broke up with you today." And if I was drunk, I would have said, "Oh shit, baby, I'm so glad you didn't do that." You know, give me a hug or a kiss or whatever, you know, right?
Yeah.
But because I was in this state, it like hit something in me, and it hit like an abandonment thing in me,
Mm.
and I went into, you know, like bad trip overdrive,
Oh man.
and it was so powerful that I just wanted to be alone with her to make sure that she wouldn't leave me, even though she already said that, right? And and I just wanted the party to end, so it'd just be me and her, and I'd feel safe and wouldn't be abandoned. And my brain emptied that party in about 20 minutes. I just watched the people leave, right? Out the door. And then we had this arduous journey where we had to take her cousin way across the bay to a place called Dublin and then back again. And after we dropped her off, I just lost my shit.
Mm.
I really lost my shit. And again, it was all this abandonment stuff that was, and I couldn't articulate it, right? I was like using other language. So by the time we got back to her place, she was ready to break up with me, right? And so we go to bed. This is all again around 3 a.m. And I had my first peek into hell.
Oh boy.
And hell was a place where there was nothing. It was like, you know, Sartre. It was totally existential, devoid of anything.
Wow.
And that's where I went. And I would try to wake her up and, you know, get some affection, nurturing,
Comfort. Yeah.
comfort. She's fast asleep, right? So now I knew enough about Jesus and the garden. Like, oh shit, I'm in the garden now. Nobody's waking up. And then I saw my life. I saw the movie of my life in my head. I'm like,
Oh.
God, what a fuck up I am. You know, I can't do anything right. You know, and if something good happens, I you know, invariably I fuck it up and self-destruct. That was a huge, huge, like all these revelations. They're not fun revelations.
No.
And I got very religious very quickly, and I prayed to God. I said, please, God, you know, all I need is some peace. I'll do anything. I'll do anything. You got me, right? I was asleep within 20 minutes. And then when I woke up the next day, I knew fundamentally my life had changed. Fundamentally, my life had changed. And I went back. I was living at home with my parents, and it was one of those moments in time where I think I talked about this on the show either today or yesterday, where like there are these moments with your parents sometimes where you think they'd be cool with something, and they weren't, right? Thought you'd be cool with this. What's going on here? And then the moments where you think that, oh man, I'm in deep shit.
Yeah.
You'd be like surprisingly cool sometimes, right? You know those moments?
Totally.
So here I am. I got to tell them, yeah, I wrecked the car and, you know, and all this. I didn't tell them, you know, the dirty details. They were like surprisingly cool. I'm like, oh, wow. It was almost like, you know, God was paving the way for me. It was like, that was a moment of grace. So the flip side of this is Maria, who was my girlfriend at the time, had been spending a lot of time with one of her girlfriends, doing a lot of stuff together. And I remember asking her, I was like, "Are you having an affair with Carrie?" Right? Because she would, Carrie would call, she'd take the phone and go in the other fucking room. I'm like, what is going on here? Right?
Yeah.
Oh, no, no, no. We're just really good friends.
Mm.
I'm like, okay. So one of the things that she told me on Sunday was like, yeah, why don't you come back Monday and I'll let you know whether or not we're still together. Right? Okay.
Wow.
So I went to her place on Monday, knock on the door, I see all my stuff in the pile right when I walk in.
Oh, not a good
I'm
sign.
like, I know where this is going, right?
Oh.
And she said, yeah, I just, I think we're done. And she says, and I'm in love with Carrie.
You knew it.
I did know it.
Yeah.
I did know it. And I'm like, okay, I wish you all the best. I was humbled. Life had humbled me. And there was, nothing I could or wanted to do about it. Now, here's the other side of the story. There was this guy that I had met when I was working at this job. I think it was around 1979. And it was at this apartment complex in San Bruno, California. And a lot of people don't know this, but there was a time in America where they had apartment complexes set up for just single people, just singles. I mean, if you had a family, I guess you could live there, but like all their activities, right? That was kind of the hook. Oh yeah, this is for singles. You're going to meet people.
Oh.
So I was the assistant rec director at one of these places, and it was just before AIDS was hitting, and I have stories from that place.
I bet you do. I bet.
I have stories. Um, so you had all these people that had some degree of habituation, whether it was booze or drugs or sex, whatever, right? And they were young. A lot of them were young professionals who were really smart. And anyway, there was this one guy there that was unlike anybody else. He was older, and he would show up on Sundays in the rec room, and we would watch stuff like Leonard Nimoy's In Search of and all that shit, right? We'd have these conversations, and I remember one time I said something. We were watching, I don't know, something about like a tiger or something. I said, "What? Well, I think it was a hawk or an eagle." So, would it be great if you could have like hawk vision? He looked at me and said, "Wouldn't it be great if you could be the hawk?" I'm like, "Whoa! I never thought about it that way. Yeah, that sounds interesting." So, and so he would bring things up in ways like he thought and talked in ways that I'd never run across before. So then he would hand me like these printouts from certain books. And then I think he gave me Ruth Montgomery's book about Edgar Cayce. And then I think he gave me another book and I ate that stuff up.
I bet.
Right. I was so into it. That's when the truth thing was starting to happen. Right. So this is all pre-car accident stuff.
Wow.
Right. So my truth whistle was getting wet. I'm like, oh man, I love this. So just before I got fired from that job, part of the fuck up, he hands me this book, and it's white, bound, hardcover book, and with gold embossed letters that say "My Peace" by the Lord Himself. And I'm like, this is not casual reading, and I'm not ready for this book. So I put it up on my bookshelf. And after this weekend happened, I said, it's time for that book. So I pulled it off the bookshelf and I started to read this. And I can't even begin to tell you what that experience was like, because it was like the words were coming off my soul. And the way the book was written, it was kind of in the sort of the I am tradition, and I would find out much later on that that's exactly where these people were coming out of. But it was unlike anything I'd ever read. And the chapters, it was so dense. I could only do maybe 4 or 5 pages at a time, because there was just something that I there's not like reading. I was trying to comprehend.
You had to
But I
process.
knew that there was part of me comprehending it in a way that I didn't understand.
Yeah.
And as I went deeper into the book, coupled with this, kind of transformational event, my life began to change in very significant ways. I started to get in better shape, and I really was, you know, into my body. I became more consistent. I was having this issue with this guy that I worked with at this restaurant. I worked for him, and I wanted to fucking kill him. And eventually, I just kept my mouth shut and removed myself from the internal conflict with him, and everything began to change in that environment. So I'm noticing things. I'm noticing that I'm changing, and that was just for starters. Then the metaphysical stuff started to happen. I don't know when, maybe 9 months out after that. I started to have out of body experiences. So, that would be at night. I got the sleep paralysis, and that part was not fun. That was not fun. Like, dealing with what I was seeing on the astral plane was not fun.
Yeah, the sleep paralysis is really rough. I've had decades of it.
Yeah. So, and it was freaky, but then I'd always, shoot up through my pineal gland, and I'd leave my body, literally leave my body, right? So this is all happening during this time. It was not uncommon for me to see people's auras.
Wow.
So, this is taking place. I started to have strange telepathic moments with people. Like, I remember this one time I was in the quad at San Francisco State, the outdoor area. And I said to myself, man, I want some carrot juice. And this woman walks right past me. She says, carrot juice. I'm like, what did you say? I said, carrot juice. I said, I was just thinking about carrot juice. I wanted carrot juice. She says, oh, that happens. Everybody knows that happens all the time. Like, no, not really. Maybe it's you, right?
It's random. That's a very specific thing.
What's funny is that before we started this interview, I just opened a bottle of carrot juice for my mother. So, like, this stuff started to happen. Okay, so on the English side of things, I had this experience where it was like the hatch door of my higher mind opened, and it was kind of a game-changing moment for me, because I was taking this class on romantic literature, and everybody starting off from Wordsworth to Keats, and everybody in between. So you get like Blake and Coleridge and Shelley and Byron, like that. Those are the main people we studied, and this is just it was just this really weird moment. It's a really, really, really weird moment. I don't think I've ever told this story, by the way.
Good.
But so there was this really hot girl from LA that I had this one class with, and her name was Audrey. And I remember we were in this class called Science and Myth, and I was just like, man, she's really hot. One day she was looking at me, and I winked at her, right? And we say hi and stuff, but it was this day that I was taking my final in this class in romantic literature. So we start talking, and so she invites me up to her, little dorm room. I'm like, man, I'm in Audrey Lavin's dorm room. And we start making out, right? And I'm thinking to myself, I shouldn't do this. I shouldn't do this. It was almost like it was a test or something. It was weird, because the old me was like, come on, let's go, right?
Yeah.
And the new me was kind of like, let's pump the brakes on this. And I did. And I took this test. And somewhere in this test, he asked this question. And it was just like the gates of heaven opened up. And I saw the cosmology of the Romantic era as exhibited by all the writers through Blake's idea of innocence, experience, and imagination. It how Wordsworth is very innocent, right? Like a lot of his stuff has about childhood, themes of childhood loss, and then by the time you get to Byron and Shelley, it's all about experience. And then you get to Keats, and it's imagination. It's like Ode to a Nightingale, Ode to a Grecian Urn. It's like, I'll throw my psyche into these songs or this object, and it will take me on this journey, right? And I don't think that happens unless I'm at this little fork in the road, right? Is it going to be the old me, or is it going to be the new me? And the new me won. And it was like all of a sudden, that was a game changer. And I began to see the world and make connections in a very different kind of way. And then I got really thrust into the English program at that point, because a lot of that stuff that I was in at that time was sort of just getting my feet wet. And then I had to catch up on all these people. So I just read all the time. And I lived like a monk. I'd get up at 5:30 in the morning, and I'd meditate, and I'd get my shit together, and I'd go to school and I'd read. And then I'd do class, and I always had gym classes where it was either weight training, or if I was going to play a sport, like I played soccer, just to run. I just wanted to run, right? So it was not only studying the curriculum, but I was going outside the curriculum, and I was trying to connect the dots on all these other things. So I started on my own. I was studying the surrealists and surrealist art and photography. I discovered Carl Jung, Man and His Symbols, Joseph Campbell. And at that time, those guys weren't really all that popular. Campbell wasn't that popular. Not long after that, he would be. So I started to get into the whole mythopoesis, and I tried to study people like Roland Barthes, and a lot of the language people I just didn't vibe with. Like I took a class in Chomsky, and I'm like, fuck, get me out of here. But I tried my best. Robert Graves, studied Robert Graves, and some of his essays, and I was just trying to catch up and have reference material, and so I could have a competitive edge with these people, and not feel stupid. And it worked. Not that I was trying to be better than them, but I also didn't want to feel like I was less than them.
Yeah.
And then I hit the dean's list. I was like, man, this is cool. Then I got addicted to being on the dean's list. So from that point forward, Mr. C plus fuck up, graduated with I don't know, my last 5 semesters were on the dean's list. And I was really, it was like, I never done this before. I graduated high school with a C average. So that's where a lot of the kind of I don't know how you would call it, more like breaking things down, seeing big pictures and patterns. That's where that came into play. The journalism stuff, it comes in drips and drabs for a while. I eventually migrate towards San Francisco Magazine when I'm 28 years old. And again, it was just another, and I'm looking, we started off this talk about my mother and my father, and I said, my mother's a grinder. And I would say some of my whatever success or things that I've been able to do does come from the grinding element, because I answered an ad for fact checking at San Francisco Magazine. And there was this woman who was working on a book called The Power Book, super nice lady. And it was my job to go to the office of the magazine. It was, it was just a part-time pay gig. And it was a resource book. It's all pre-internet. They'd have these resource books that you would buy and have a contact person, address, phone number, fax number.
What a different world, huh?
Totally different world. I'm not even sure they had faxes then, by the way.
Wow.
I think this might have been pre-fax. So I was charged with, along with these other people, going in and fact checking. And I like talking to people. So getting on the phone and talking to them was fine. I liked it. And every now and then I run across a super interesting person. Like I got to talk to Joe Alioto, who was the mayor of San Francisco. I got to talk to Terry Riley, who's the father of minimalism, because I was fact checking his stuff. I got to talk to Lee Steinberg, who was a pretty well-known sports agent. And and even if I talked to somebody who was not famous, I like talking to them. So every day I would go there. I'm like, God, I love this. I'm in an office, and there are people that are doing journalism. I just love being around it. And so there's these weird pivotal moments that happen in people's lives. And there was this woman who was the receptionist, and she was promised this job of being an editorial assistant when they had enough money to pay her. But in the meantime, she would answer phones and then go over copy. I could tell she wasn't pleased with it, but that's what her job was. And this magazine is kind of weird because it was started by friends of Nancy Pelosi. They were from Maryland. And again, I kind of knew this at the time a little bit, but not that much. And they were from Maryland. And the magazine was in Paul Pelosi's building. He owned the building. So I would get on the elevator with Paul Pelosi from time to time.
Wow.
And I'd get off at the second floor. He'd get off at the third floor with Pelosi management. I had no idea that he'd turned into a hero. He was just the guy I was riding the elevator with, right?
Right.
So the editor of the magazine got into an argument with the two publishers. And I really liked the editor. He seemed like a really nice guy. And he quit. He quit. And the girl at the front desk, I don't know, maybe she was loyal to him, or I don't know what the story was. But then she quit. So they bring on this other guy who was like prototypical editor who drinks, right? I mean, he reminded me of Bright Lights, Big City. Like he reminded me of an editor from that book. He was English though; he wasn't American. So they hired this guy. He looks around and says, we'll need an editorial assistant." And there was this woman, Catherine Fong, who had been talking to Donnelly, who had hired me, and Donnelly recommended me. And Catherine said, "Well, what about Robert? He seems to be really good at fact checking and following up and details." And then Catherine, approached me, said, "Hey," because I'd become friends with Cat. I was really good at like connecting with people. And she said, "Hey, Robert, how would you like to have a job as an editorial assistant?" "Are you kidding me?" It's like, shit. Of course. It didn't pay that much money, and I didn't get any benefits. And I had to work a second job, but I didn't care. It was like, I made it, I'm an editorial assistant
Big
for
chance.
one of two magazines that meant anything in San Francisco. And that year was really great. It was a totally great year. And I did some editorial assisting, but I was really good. For whatever reason, the producer side of me started to come through again. And I was really good at setting up interview and photo shoots and I was sort of greasing the wheel and doing other stuff. And so that for a year, that was great. It was 88, the year of the dragon. And then fuck, I was getting ready to get married. And I had a nervous breakdown. And it was on my it was on in astrology, they have this thing called the Chirotic crisis, which happens around the degree of your Chiron. And my Chiron is 28 Aquarius, and here I am, I'm 28 years old. And I'm getting ready to go through my Chirotic crisis and my Saturn return. And I, one of these days I'll write about it, but I lost my shit. Like I really lost my shit. And then I lost my job. And that was when I went dark night. It was real dark night. I wound up leaving San Francisco. I wind up in the Pacific Northwest. And the only reason I'm going to this place is because I start to write there. And I sent my resume into Pacific Northwest magazine. And I got a response from it. And it was like, do you want to do a story on the real estate market in the Pacific Northwest? I said, sure. And that's what I did. I researched the market and I wrote a story for them. It got published. And I was like, man, this is cool. Then I did another story about a friend of mine who does these they have these death masks, right? Plaster of Paris. And she did one of me. She's super talented. She's living in Oregon. I did a story on her. And then I wound up leaving Oregon or Washington eventually. So the writing thing was always kind of fitful. Like I would go into these spurts, right? And then I'd come back. And then in the 90s, I worked for an independent record label, and I would write like all the blurbs and catalog stuff, which I really loved because the music was fucking crazy. So you'd have to come up with a new language to talk about the music. And then I really don't come back online with the journalist stuff, I think around 96. And I start to work for Mondo 2000, which is this crazy magazine that was really well known back in the 90s. And I'm there at the end. I'm trying, I'm like, I really like it. The owner's a nut job. She's a total nut job. One of the smartest people I've ever met. But I want to be a part of this because I'm getting all these opportunities. I get to interview all these people, all these, musicians, some of which never made the light of day because we couldn't get a fucking issue out. So I had all these interviews that I would do, and eventually I found a place for them. So I did a lot of interviews, and some of them went into print. I would do some freelance writing. I wrote for the San Francisco Examiner, and I did some freelance stuff for them. One was a book on. It was on. Again, I contacted them, gave my background, and there was this book by this woman. Her first name was Barry. And she'd written a book called, I think, The Office Mystic or something like that. And it was a book on astrology as it related to the workplace. And so I did a feature and a review on this book and her. It was really cool, right? So here I am. I'm getting published by, San Francisco Examiner, and I got another piece on water in this company called Trinity Water up in the Pacific Northwest. So, I'm a working journalist at this point. I'm making some side money, Mondo's not paying me, but I'm getting all these promo books and records and turning them in and making, it's how you make money in that world. And I'm getting all the perks of, kind of going to shows, and .com was happening then. So there's all this .com shit going on and all these, product launches, that you eat like a fucking king at these product launches. Stupid money. It was a good time to be a journalist then.
I bet.
You could get paid. And so that was cool. That was fun. And then I started to write for this magazine it was an online magazine called Getting It. And that's when I interviewed David Bowie, which was great. You've heard my David Bowie story, right?
I believe I have, but if you want to tell it, I'm sure there's people out there that don't know it and would be interested.
Okay. So I was a huge David Bowie fan. Like,
Yeah.
My guys growing up were Bowie and Hendrix. Those were my dudes. because they were spacemen, and I like spacemen. And so Bowie had already come out with Earthling, which I really like as a record, and they were shutting down the press on it. And he was going to be in San Francisco, and the word in the street was that Bowie liked Mondo. He knew what it was. So I reached out to his publicist and I said, "Hey, David's in town. Can I think I could interview him?" And she said, "No, we stopped doing press for Earthling, but I'll get you some tickets for the show." I'm like, "Great, cool." So I saw the show, fantastic. Not expecting anything. This is around like January of '99. I get a phone call or an email from the publicist. I forget which. I think it was an email. She said, "Robert, do you want to come to New York and interview David Bowie?"
Just out of nowhere, right?
Yeah, sure. I said, "You don't even have to give me a hotel. I have friends I can stay with," which was true. I said, "Just fly me out there." So I get flown out there. I'm staying with my friends, and I'm so nervous, right? I'm going to be interviewing David Bowie. So I got to rewind the tape. There was this guy that the Mondo world was such a weird world, and it was what's this guy's name again? Oh yeah, that guy. I always forget the name of this director, and I have to remind myself of this director. So there would be people that would show up at the Mondo. Oh, sorry, hold on. The Mondo camp, and hold on. At the Mondo camp. You still there?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Okay. Yeah. And I didn't often know who they were, but it was cool. They just, "Hey, I'm so and so, and I love the magazine. And can I come by and start?" Yeah, yeah. So I got to become friends with this one guy. His name was Nick, and he was a photographer in England, and he told me all these wild stories. And he told me the story. He was friends with this director named Derek Jarman, and Derek Jarman was he did Jubilee with Adam Ant. Like, he was a really interesting director, very interesting stylistically, very gay, very punk, and David Bowie and Derek Jarman were working together on this movie, and it was called I think it was called Neutron. I think that was the name of the movie, Neutron, and it was all about this futuristic, dystopic society. And he would go over there, and he and Jarman would talk about it, and they would kind of storyboard it and everything. And then one day, David Bowie left his Marlboro Lights at Derek Jarman's, and Derek Jarman started to call his friends, say, "Hey, guess what? Bowie left his Marlboro Lights here," right? Like some big fucking thing, right? Eventually, it comes back to Bowie, and Bowie calls up Derek Jarman. He says, "Eric, I'm no longer doing your movie, and I'd like my Marlboros back."
Oh my gosh.
Well, it's because Bowie, he understood sympathetic magic. And somewhere, in that pack of Marlboro Lights was David Bowie, right?
Yeah.
So he didn't want that out there. So I filed that story away. I thought, that's interesting.
That's a great one.
So I go to the headquarters of Virgin, and I'm going to meet Bowie. I'm watching, it was for the Hours video, which is the Hours record, which is a really depressing record. It's like his midlife crisis record.
Yeah.
There's some good songs in there, but man, it's depressing. So I go in there, I go into the boardroom of Virgin, and right at the front of the table is an ashtray, a pack of Marlboro Lights, and a small lighter. Right? I'm like, oh, there's those Marlboro Lights. That's interesting. I'm sitting down, And the publicist walks in and he says, Robert, David Robert. I get up and Bowie's got all these really fucked up teeth. And he's like, got this glaze in his eyes. I'm like, I don't know what's going on here. And he kind of sticks out his hand like a bit of a zombie, and I shake his hand. I'm like, okay, well, we'll just go with it, right? And he's staring off into space, and then he takes his left hand, puts it to his mouth, and he pulls out these fake teeth, and he slams his hand on the table and says, "Unflappable." I like that. I'm like,
you passed the test.
I just got punked by David Bowie.
Oh, that's hilarious.
And so we get off. We're talking about the interview. We start talking about Velvet Goldmine and what's his name? Reese, whatever his name is, Jonathan Reese Meyer, whatever his name is.
Yes, that's it.
Yeah, he's like a cipher of him and Iggy Pop together. But it was based theoretically on David Bowie. He says, "Was I in that? Was I supposed to be in that?" God, I didn't know that. Like, he's making a slight at the director. Like, if you're gonna fucking base your character on me, base your fucking character on me.
Yeah.
It not Jim Osterberg. Iggy. We talked about Iggy. He and Iggy were on the outs at that time.
Mm.
And he called him Uncle Jim or something like that. It was, a little dismissive. I don't know. They were friendly, but you could kind of tell like the relationship had changed. And then I said, so, what are the plans for Ziggy Stardust? I'd heard Broadway play, music. Oh, yeah, we're going to do it on all these different platforms. We're going to have a Broadway play. It's going to, it'll be on the internet. It'll be, it'll be a movie. I'm like, wow, that's great. That's awesome. So we're talking movies, right? I said, since we're on the topic of movies, there was this movie that you were supposed to do with Derek Jarman called Neutron. And whatever happened to that? And he started to talk about it. And they said, oh, we just kind of ran out of money. And he says, by the way, how do you know that? Not many people know about that. I said, well, there's another part of the story I want to ask you about. So there's a rumor that you left your Marlboro Lights there and you wanted them back from Derek, and that's the reason why you stopped doing the movie. You should have seen the look on fucking Bowie's face. It was, and he's a control freak. Like, he's a nice guy. He's very positive, but he's a control freak. It was like the program glitched.
My bad.
I had to bail David Bowie out in that moment. I said, urban legend? Oh, God, yes, right. Urban legend. Urban legend.
I'm sure he appreciated you.
Oh, I think he did. And it was, and it's kind of funny, right? Because he's the one that came in to the interview. Like, I'm gonna get this guy.
Yeah.
Little did he know that he was going to be gotten. So that was cool. And I think I sold that interview for the most. I think I got paid $1,500 for that interview, which back in
that day, yeah,
good money, really good money. So then I got hired by this .com, and I started to do just a lot of writing for the website, and it was music related. There wasn't anything really special about it. I would do interviews with people. I think I did. It was the weirdest interview. We did an interview with Echo and the Bunnymen.
Oh, wow.
And Ian McCullough was so fucking drunk.
Oh, no.
It was all on the phone. He was so shit-faced. But Will Sargent was really cool. He was really cool. And we talked about this guitar record he did called Works. And it's like, again, like nobody really, knew about that record. And so I would do stuff like that. But it was, it was all baked into the house. And then I started to do some more writing once I formally left the company, and I would do features. I would interview some artists and do features on those artists, which was really good. One of them ties back to that experience when I was in junior college, and we probably don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to skip over it. But and then the real bulk of the writing that I basically did from like 2009 to, I don't know, roughly about 2019. So for, about almost 10 years was on my website and writing about astrology and, culture related items. And I really miss it. And I'm working on my website so the writing part could be a bigger part of it again.
Yeah,
And
I'm sure people want to see that.
and my feeling is that when everybody's zigging, you should be zagging.
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
the writing part is, I think, going to become more of an important part of what I do. And I'm looking forward to it. So again, it's just getting those, because I had my website redone, and it kind of looks cool and everything, but it's really hard for me to navigate and write and post. And so we're going to tackle some of those things. So this year I can be more productive on that, because I love doing that stuff. I love talking about all these different things and mashing them together and coming up with creative language and, kind of, like a sonic, a sonic fiction, like, where words take on sort of these multi-dimensional layers and meanings. And you just can't do that with language, with spoken language.
No, I agree. It is, for me, it's easier to communicate in writing than it is verbally. There's just, you have time to process a little bit longer. It gives that little bit of time that's extra to really touch on things that you might not be as quick to translate verbally.
Yeah.
I get it.
Yeah. For me, it's about pictures. You can just paint different pictures when you're writing. And Hemingway talked about his style of writing, which a lot of people thought was very simplistic, but it's really not. And his style of writing was like the iceberg. You would read the tip of the iceberg, but the real content was below the surface. And to me, that's where really good writing comes into play. And you can take people into different levels and say things in ways that can set off different parts of the brain than speaking a word. And there's a place for spoken word, but we live in such a heavily trafficked verbal world now.
Yeah, that's true. And now we have AI to contend with.
Yeah. Yeah, I asked, I think, ChatGPT to write a song about David Bowie as a cowboy in space.
How that
Pretty
goes.
good, pretty good fucking song.
Well, so I usually ask people, since I usually ask people, how do you feel things will move forward with AI and creative people staying relevant and surviving against the AI? Do you think that we're screwed, or do you think that there's still going to be that place for humans that are artists and writers and creatives?
I think there'll always be a place, but the place is shifting. Um, I think of somebody like Jeff Koons, who's a conceptual artist. You know who Jeff Koons is, right?
I do, yeah.
Yeah. So what would Jeff Koons do? Jeff Koons would hire some, Italian crafts guys to, knock off a version of Michael Jackson and Bubbles. Like, what did Jeff Koons do? Did he have a sketch? Maybe he had a sketch. But for whatever reason, that Michael Jackson and Bubbles was worth a shit ton of money because some Italian craftsmen, saw Michael Jackson and Bubbles through a different lens. How is that different than AI in some ways? Right? Like Jeff Koons was using those Italian craftsmen like AI. Here's an idea, go make it.
Right. Yeah. So it's his idea. His conceptual idea, but he's having other people execute it, which is basically what you give to AI.
Exactly. Now, not everybody's Jeff Koons, and I'm not even saying Jeff Koons is great.
Yeah.
Right. He's just clever, and sees things. Again, a lot of it is. It's so weird when we get into art. Like one time, there's that story of Marcel Duchamp finding the bottle rack washed up on the beach and then putting it in an exhibition, and people were fucking just like, wow.
Yeah.
Right. So who was like, what went on there? Was it the fact that it went through this natural process that made it more artistic, or was it Duchamp's eye that kind of branded it and stamped it as art, and people saw it through that lens? Mm-hmm. I mean, these questions are always, to me, very fascinating. And I've been using AI to generate thumbnails for some of my shows, and they're not always very good. I mean, they look professional, but the ideas really aren't there. Every now and then, there's one that, like, I used one for today, and I was trying to combine Jim Carrey and Joe Biden and mirrors and Gemini. That was part of the text. And Chat GPT came up with a Joe Biden with 3 arms. But you had to look. You had to look, and one of the arms was a robotic arm.
Wow.
I had to plow through a lot of those images to get there, right? And it's like, oh, this is interesting. So I don't think we should have a heavy diet of AI. I wouldn't want AI to write anything for me. But I'm not an illustrator. I don't have a problem with AI illustrating for me.
Yeah.
So I think we come into this whole idea of soul. And I don't know, maybe the gap will get real close. But when somebody writes something that comes from their soul, like a really, if we're still capable of profound work, there's no way AI can come close to that. When AI writes something that brings you to tears, let me know.
Okay, fair enough.
Right?
Yeah.
Because that's what humans are capable of. Humans theoretically can translate their experience into something moving. And I'm not sure AI has that capability. AI can't create in that way yet.
No, not yet.
Yet. And I'd be hard pressed to think that it would. When it does, I don't know where we go from that place.
I'm with you there. Well, so before we wrap up, I want to ask you if you have maybe any advice to people that are just starting out in really anything creative, writing or whatever, or changing their creative path. Do you have any words of wisdom to give anyone out there?
Well, I think persistence is right at the top of the list. If you're going to be good at anything, you have to be persistent, and you have to be willing to not be good at it for a while. If I mean, that's if you. I mean, some people just have preternatural gifts, and they can just do things. But if it's a new territory you're mapping out, you've got to have persistence. That's number one. Number two would be don't be afraid to be disliked, right? Like we tend to think that because something is popular, it's good. That's not true.
Yeah.
So that takes creative risk, and don't be afraid to take them. And that would be along the lines of being authentic. Don't be anybody else. Just be who you are, and know who, to your best ability, know who you are, because you'll find out more about who you are through the creative process. And I guess if it's writing, find a voice. Everybody's got a voice. Really, really great writers can shift their voice, but you better be really good. But find your voice and gravitate towards things that you're curious about, and or have an affection towards, or a feeling towards. I just started doing this news show on Monday nights where I combine sports and astrology, because I love sports and I've always loved sports. And there's somebody really doing a sports astrology show. And we get like 60 people, 70 people in the live chat, but I don't care. It's fun. My co-host is this millennial who's kind of a goofball, but I really like him. And I make money with working with people, and some of my other content will bring in some money through memberships and things like that. So it's kind of a labor of love for me. But if you have those things, if you're very curious about it, or you feel drawn to it, even when you're tired, you'll do it because you like it.
Yeah.
You may have to motivate yourself a little bit more, but you'll like it. And this is one I'm still learning. And that's, I wouldn't say be okay, but learn how to deal with the parts of the thing that are attendant with the art or the creative work that aren't fun. Right?
Like the business side of things.
Business side of things.
Creative person.
Right. Or the editing side of things.
Yes.
Or whatever those things are, you have to learn to accept them and become relatively good at them until you can find somebody else that will do them for you, and it won't take a big chunk out of your income. That part, I think, can really. I have to, I struggle with that at times, and it's always a constant kind of getting on myself to do the things that I don't always like to do, but they're part of it. They're just a part of it.
Beautiful.
Have fun. There's not enough fun or joy in the world.
No, especially now.
Yeah, the world it's like a fucking black hole that just sucks the joy and fun and appreciation out of everything.
Yeah, we have to look for it. We have to look for it and really seek it out.
Yeah, absolutely. And in hard or dark times, it's difficult to manufacture that. So you really have to find a through line for that and be courageous to stand in the face of a lot of the, sort of dystopic reminders we have every day that the thing that you're doing has value. It's worth something. You're worth something. And here's the last thing I'll say about this. You never know how something you do will impact another human.
Yeah, absolutely.
You just never know. You can save somebody's life by, writing about something, and they see themselves in that and say, shit, somebody somehow got me. And I don't feel so alone, or I don't feel so isolated. You don't ever underestimate that.
So true. Beautiful. Well, I really appreciate you coming on and spending time with me and everybody else. And where can people find you?
RobertPhoenix.com is a good place. And the 11th House on YouTube is another good place. Before I go, I got a little gossip for you,
Oh,
JJ. A little gossip for you, Miss JJ. It's good gossip.
okay.
What do they call it? Tea? It's good tea.
Okay.
I had dinner with Emily Moyer
Ah,
about 2 weeks ago.
Emily.
She said the show she did with you was one of the best shows she had ever done.
Oh, I really enjoyed it. I love Emily.
So when I heard that, I'm like, shit, I should get fucking JJ on my show. We'll do it. We'll do it.
Okay.
We'll get
What
you
are we
on.
going to talk about?
I don't know.
All
A lot
right.
of times I
Well,
don't know what I'm gonna talk about with people. We figure it out.
I'm not really doing too many shows with other people anymore, but I would with you.
Okay.
So sounds good to me.
When the time is right, we'll know.
We will.
Yeah.
All
And
right.
thank you for all you do and bringing all the beauty into the world that you do. I really appreciate that.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
All right. We'll see everybody next time. Thanks, Robert.